right, good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to call to order the 12 p.m. special PSVS meeting of April 14th, 2022. Before we move on to the roll call, I just wanted to note that we have our new appointee, Mary Madlin, the council's at-large appointee, joining us today. So thank you, Mary, for applying, and thanks for joining us today. So with that, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Ortiz.
Here.
Vice Chair Abernathy.
Here.
Committee Member Madlin.
Here.
Committee Member Dewey.
Here.
Committee Member Perez-Andreessen.
Here.
Committee Member Keller.
Yes, ma'am.
Committee Member Coman.
Here.
Committee Member Singh.
Here.
And Committee Member Prince.
All right. Thank you. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Public comments.
So statements for items listed on today's agenda are given a 2-minute time limit, 20 minutes total per agenda item. If you have written comments that are longer than your verbal statement, give them to the clerk, who will give copies to the committee. If you're here to make a public statement, please fill out a public speaker card and hand it to the city clerk. Madam Clerk, do we have any public speakers?
We have not received any public speaker cards for today's meeting.
All right. Next item, please.
Adoption of minutes from the March 31st, 2022 Oversight Committee meeting.
All right. The minutes were included in your agenda packet. Do I have a motion from one of my colleagues?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Vice Chair Abernathy. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Vice Chair Abernathy, second by Committee Member Perez-Andreessen. Madam Clerk, please conduct the vote.
Chair Ortiz.
Aye.
Vice Chair Abernathy.
Aye.
Committee Member Madlin.
Aye.
Committee Member Dewey.
Aye.
Committee Member Perez-Andreessen. Aye. Committee Member Keller.
Aye.
Committee Member Coman.
Aye.
Committee Member Singh.
Aye.
Committee Member Prince. Motion is approved with Committee Member Prince absent.
All right. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Next item, please.
New business item 4A, fiscal year 2021-22 PSVS proposed budget overview.
All right. I will turn to the city manager.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. Welcome back. It's good to be with you here today. And the packets that you received last week had a lot of information in there. Just a couple of thoughts about that. We wanted you to have the full level of detail for all of the proposals that we'll cover in presentation both today and next week. And so we're not trying to cover all the content from the packet today. We've split it into two groups. We'll focus on public safety, homelessness, and a few of the smaller items under fiscal solvency today. And we'll have presentations from department directors in some of those areas and some that are a little more general. I'll try and cover those best I can. And then if there's more detailed questions, we have staff available to answer some of those. As far as process goes as well, we look to provide these presentations this week and next week, and then tee up the slate of proposals for approval at next meeting. We're not looking to approve items this meeting. We would look to approve all of the items at the end of next week's meeting. But we're happy to answer questions and clarify on all of the topics today as well as next week as we get into those subject matter areas. So for just sake of review, this is a slide that you saw at your last meeting, but we are looking at $113 million in next year's budget. 67.5 million of that is in ongoing programs or previously approved recurring one-time amounts. We actually have some significant dollars that, for example, our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We've made a commitment to put $5 million a year into that Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The commitment initially was over a 5-year period. At the end of those 5 years, we'll see where we're at. I would expect we'll probably continue funding affordable housing for some time. But that is an item that's actually not going to be presented on today other than some or excuse me, not this year. We'll provide a status update, but we're not coming back for approval on that item because it has been included in previous approvals. But that is part of that $67 million number, and so it's worth noting that there are several contracts for services as well as recurring one-time allocations that are part of that amount that frankly we're not fully locked in on as a city, that we can make some adjustments in future years to some of those dollars. But what we're talking about today and next week is $45 million. What do we do with those $45 million to expand upon existing programs and address our remaining challenges and opportunities that are in front of us? From an ongoing standpoint, again, you've seen this slide. This is information about what's in the ongoing proposals. We split our proposals into ongoing and one time. It is worth noting that in the ongoing side, this does include some one-time operating expenses. We call it ongoing because it's not really a capital project. But this is if we are hiring additional staff. This is their vehicles, it's their equipment, it's their office supplies. And so this actually, of the amount here up there, about half of that is truly ongoing. The rest is one-time operating to help outfit new employees or new programs. And so that number wouldn't carry forward automatically to next year's budget. It would be really about half of that would carry forward to next year's budget. But we'll be able to get into some of those details as well. It's all in your packets. Again, we're going to be focusing today on the first of three of those. And so we'll speak to public safety and then homelessness. Really quickly, actually, on this is the ongoing amounts. Again, these will be spoken to in our presentation, so I'm not going to go through each one of these lines, but this at this time, but this gives a sense that we're really talking about our violence intervention on the public safety side. We're talking about some of the human resources costs to hire the additional police officers. On the fire dispatch side and maintenance side, filling some gaps there. And then on the police side, it's largely around some support staff that continue to allow us to redeploy police service technicians out into the field and also support the increases in the efforts that have occurred from the police department. But Chief Terry will speak to the importance of these positions across the board. And then lastly, we do have some use of technology that's helping us to be more efficient with our policing resources, and also an expansion of an important program that's creating some good efficiencies by having mental health professionals in our dispatch center, and they're able to defer a lot of calls and not have them go out to the sworn officers and be able to divert those. But again, Chief Terry will speak more to that. The purpose of this was to just give a quick summary of what that public safety ongoing amount looks like. Actually, at this time, we're going to say a little bit about a different program, our gun violence intervention program, and then we'll shift gears and ask police to come up and share their presentation. So, the California Violence Intervention and Prevention Program is named after a grant that the city received. We received a $1.5 million grant a couple of years ago to create a unit that would help get at gun violence intervention. We've actually done gang suppression and gang intervention historically in Bakersfield through different partnerships, and the police department has worked at this issue before, but we have not had a complementary non-sworn team that's helping to manage the service side and the sort of communication and intervention side of gun violence, while enforcement is really important in that aspect. We're coordinating those efforts with the police department. This has given us an opportunity to create a comprehensive program around gun violence reduction. This is patterned after best practice programs that have been developed in other cities, and many of those cities see double-digit reductions in their shootings and homicides. And for example, and I share this only because I was a participant in this program in Stockton. We saw a 40% reduction in homicides over a 2-year period by implementing this evidence-based program. And we know here in Bakersfield we've seen an uptick in gun violence, and unfortunately in this last year we saw record numbers. And so we're implementing this program to get at those issues. I think it's important to also reflect that most cities that implement a program like this, it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years to get a program fully implemented. We received this grant close to 2 years ago. We're about a year and a half into our implementation, and we expect to start seeing good results. We've seen some initial results, but I would reflect again, 2021 was not a good year, and we're really wanting to ramp up on this issue. So just some current data over the last 8 months as we've been in implementation mode. We have 151 individuals that have been identified as at very high risk of gun violence. And what this program does is it follows data. You really follow the data to be very pinpointed in how you use your resources. But typically you'll find that in most scenarios, it's less than 1%. In fact, it's 0.1% of the population is usually responsible for anywhere from 60 to 80% of gun violence. So when you think about a city of 400,000 people, how do you get at policing at a scale that's that large? It's really 100 to 200 people who are doing most of the gun violence. That's a number you can really make an impact on. And so it's following that data, getting to those individuals, providing direct communication to them that we know that they're at risk, and that if they don't put down guns, they're at the top of our enforcement list. But if they're willing to put down the guns, then we'll help them find a different path and provide services. And so we have had, again, 35 participants who've enrolled in our services. We've had 72 successful mediation meetings, where that means a shooting is likely to not have occurred because we were able to sit down and have folks not out on the streets and talking to them about their own safety and the safety of others, and also 209 de-escalations for other gun violence related conflicts. There's a lot of content here, but it's there for the public record. I would just highlight a few things. Is again that we're creating a dedicated team, or an Office of Violence Prevention is what it's been called in a lot of other communities. It allows us to have a much more coordinated and data-informed approach to intervening with gun violence. And it's actually done in a way that is procedurally just and allows us to increase community police trust at the same time that we're lowering gun violence and homicides and improving the outcomes of individuals who are at very highest risk of gun violence. So what does this mean for, excuse me, I went a little too fast. What does this mean for this coming budget cycle? We had 2.5 members of this team. That's all it was 2.5 members. And then grant funding, again, that $1.5 million of grant funding for several caseworkers that we had contracted out with. And this was a conversation initially is how much of this work can be done by contract and identify the good community partners who can do this work and have them do that work. But we had a core project management team on our side to help do the coordination and the data analysis. And we've identified a gap over this first 1.5 to 2 years, and that is our ability to have incident responders go out to crime scenes who are not law enforcement and make contacts with community members who may have witnessed violence or their family members were victims of violence. And those are critical moments where somebody's reevaluating life choices, when we can have a conversation with them and encourage them to either themselves enroll in our programs, or to encourage if it was their son or their cousin or their nephew to enroll into our programs. And it's a pivotal moment where people start thinking about retaliation, and we need to be there in that moment to stop that retaliation from happening. And so we're proposing 2 additional employees who would be community engagement specialists. One of the reasons that we are not proposing this to be by contract is that these are folks that we're going to let behind the yellow tape and have very sensitive confidential information, and they're going to work pretty closely with our team. This is actually out of the city manager's office as well as law enforcement, and we feel that that can best be done by a tight team of city employees who are engaging in this work and coordinating around these responses, and then working with our community-based organizations to do the follow-up referrals to these individuals, again, who are at very highest risk of violence. I mentioned 2.5 employees, but a half-time clerk typist, and it's proven to be a lot of work and also challenging to hold a part-time employee in this environment. And so we're proposing to make that half-time position a full-time position in addition to these 2 new outreach workers. And as noted in other areas, this is startup costs on the equipment and training. These are actually positions that are very challenging work, and so we do have specific trainings through organizations like the Urban Peace Institute in Los Angeles to help them be well trained to engage in these very difficult and challenging conversations. So I'm going to actually pause there, and again, we've got lengthy materials to go through with police department and fire department, but wanted to give an opportunity if there are questions about this gun violence intervention program before we move on.
Yeah. Committee Member Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. City Manager, thank you very much for your presentation to this point, but we kind of got ahead of where I was at, so I'm trying to catch up with you. I want to go back to the original discussion about that we're looking at expenditures of $45 million. And I want to thank the finance manager, Mr. McKeegan, also, because he kind of helped me understand some of this budget stuff. But if I go back to our discussion last time, last year we had $78 million, and we thought the final number was going to be somewhere by around $100 million. And so maybe I'm confused about what we're talking about here. Is there only $45 million left over after commitments to that measure in money, or please help me understand that.
Yeah, thank you, committee member. It's a good question. So one thing I would reflect really quickly first is that the number from last year of the close to $78 million, that was a conservative measure given the economy at the time. We thought that would be our revenues. And so it's only after 2 quarters of really high revenues at mid-year did we say, it's looking more like in the 90s, and now after one more set of numbers from our sales tax consultants, it's going to be over $100 million. So it really was $78 million last year. About 54 of that was from programs and things that had been approved in prior years. And then there were some additions and some one-time projects to get up to that full $78 million. What we're talking about with this 113, it's actually, again, as a reminder, it's $101 million revenues for next year. We're carrying forward just over $12 million in one-time monies from this year into next year. And so we wouldn't program those for ongoing programs, but we have a number of CIP projects we're proposing underneath that $12 million. But what the 45 represents, it's a combination of that $12 million one-time money and a little more than the $30 million of ongoing monies that are still available, the difference between prior year commitments and the 101. So prior year commitments are totaling about $67 million. And the difference between that and the 101 plus the 12 is the 45.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Colleagues? Yes. Vice Chair Abernathy.
When I see these clerk typists, and they're always in the 60 and 65,000, and I'm wondering over time, in the last 10 years, have you found employees that do things that now, because of over the last 10 years, how we can do everything so much faster, that you could move some of them into some of these spots, or are they so busy that we have to keep hiring new clerk typists? And then including equipment, I mean, I've got furniture from years ago, and I just keep moving it around, and I'm just wondering, we have to buy new stuff a lot. You don't have warehouses full of, most places do, so I'm just asking.
These are good questions, Vice Chair, and I would answer it in sort of three different buckets. One is that we've increased total staffing by nearly 300 more than 300 employees over the last 3 years, and so we've used up most of our sort of surplus equipment and furniture. And we've actually been, even I could speak in our own office, the city manager's office, we had some recent hires, and we used everything that was left and still, had some needs. And so we're at a really an unprecedented, period of being able to add new programs, and so there is a need for additional equipment. I would say also to the types of positions. Again, we've created so many new programs like our rapid response program and our Clean City program and our violence prevention program that we have a need to provide the level of support to all these new programs. We have the ability to do new things. Where I think a third response, though, is that we actually have been investing in making efficiencies that haven't been fully realized or implemented yet. So like the ERP system that you approved funding for at mid-year, it's a new software, and it's going to help us to automate many of our processes that today are being done manually by clerk typists, for example. And so we had some departments request additional positions for either accounting or secretarial support this year, which I said, thank you for letting us know of the need, but let's not do that one this year. Let's wait, because we really need to see what this implementation brings, because it should create some efficiencies that allow us to redeploy staff to be doing meaningful work and not sort of this tedious manual work. Unfortunately, Bakersfield hasn't been in a position to invest in those efficiencies historically, so we're playing some catch up, and we're about to use all this new technology to make us much more efficient. We're not quite there yet. I would say this particular position, though, new program, it's the level of support needed for an office. And actually, some of the members of the committee that were with us previously will recall that we had communicated that we wanted to use this initial grant as a pilot and a starting point with the expectation that we would probably grow this program. And I do expect that over time, both through grants, we've actually applied for another $3 million grant under this same program to help offset costs. That will largely go to our contracted services, those grant monies. We see the scope of this program being big enough it will need a full-time secretarial or administrative support to it. But I think the question overall of how many support staff do we need is a good one, and we've held back on a number of potential additions on support staff until we get some of these technology efficiencies in place, because it's going to change really how we do work at the city.
Just as a follow-up, see, when I see these numbers, I multiply it by 35 years and health benefits and pension for another 20-some years, and it's a lot of money. And they never get laid off, and so I see. And so I think I just advise everybody here, these numbers, this goes on into perpetuity, and the next person that gets hired in that spot. So it's important to realize that dollar value.
So these numbers don't include benefits?
Yes, they do.
They do?
Yes.
They do, yes.
Okay. I had a comment on the your startup costs with the deaths and all those. These are pretty high numbers for paying people, from what I've experienced. And then as far as hiring more people, I mean, I've started a thing where we're just redefining operating procedures and more efficiency since you're bringing in new equipment. Just the expense of hiring more people, especially in this state, really affects the bottom line. And I mean, I looked through this, and I'll just say it. I thought more of this money should go for mental health with the homeless or whatever, and the shootings, and to the police officers.
Thank you, committee member, for those thoughts. And I think in the big picture, we agree that there's a need for additional officers. That's why there are significantly more dollars on the policing side to hiring more officers. Also on the mental health side, it's a jurisdictional question largely with the county behavioral health and recovery services department with responsibilities there, although we have been providing some funding to pilot programs with them to get them more engaged and involved in our efforts. And I would say within the full context, we need all of the different pieces. And our CalVIP program is a small fraction of our public safety efforts, but I think a good return on investment for the impact that can be made by a small team focusing in on those that are at very highest risk of gun violence. But I think fair comments and considerations about what are all the different pieces we need.
So I just have a couple of questions. So just, I mean, driving home on, the conversation about the clerk typist. I mean, the city has a salary schedule, and this is within the range of the salary schedule for that position. Is that correct?
Correct. It's at our first step in that.
Okay. And then I just had some questions on background. Again, this is my first year on the Oversight Committee. So has this program received Measure N funding in the past?
It has. Those are the 2.5 positions I mentioned are Measure N funded.
Okay. And so the $1.5 million that we've received in terms of grant funding from the state, what exactly is that covering if the Measure N funds are funding personnel?
Yeah, the $1.5 million is funding all of our contract work. And so we have 3 community-based organizations that have caseworkers that take these referrals from our project management team and follow up on those referrals. It also is helping to fund some of our planning to do that data analysis, as well as our technical assistance on this. We do have consultants who are experts in these types of programs who are helping us design our new program and our new office. But the bulk of it does go to those CBOs and the work that they do in the case management of these high-risk individuals.
Okay. And then my next question was going to be about, the ongoing funding of this, because, so what is, if the city is not successful in getting those additional grants for future years, what's the expectation that Measure N would be picking up the full freight of this program in the future potentially?
A very good observation, Chair. We have 2 good interim measures. We have appropriated $2 million of ARPA funds that is eligible for this specific type of gun violence intervention program. We are pursuing this additional grant, but it is our expectation that over a 5 or 10 year period, we want to continue this program running, and that some of those contract costs would shift to the Public Safety Vital Services tax as our grant programs, demonstrate results. If they do, we want to continue it. If they don't, then we could reassess, but it would be the expectation that the Public Safety Vital Services would pick up some of those contract costs at the end of those grant periods.
And so this is, I saw that there were some results, but this will be kind of the data results will be reported back. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Any further questions, comments from my colleagues? Okay. I think we can move on.
Thank you, Chair. We'll invite the police department and city clerk if we could shift to their slide deck.
Chief, did you come with backup?
I did. I sure did. Good afternoon, everyone. Chairman Ortiz, members of the committee, Greg Terry, Police Chief, and I'm here with Assistant Chief Brent Stratton, Mike Hale, and we are together going to be presenting next year's request related to the Public Safety and Vital Services measure, and with some strong support from Christy Tinter, our Human Resources Director, and she'll be up here in just a minute. The mission of the police department is to partner with our community to protect the lives and the property of the people that we serve. And we take very serious our responsibilities in this community and have implemented a community-oriented policing philosophy to bring about completion of this mission. It really has three elements: problem-solving, partnerships, and organizational transformation. The term community policing has been around for a long time and can be described a lot of different ways. But for us, it has these three elements. And so when I talk about problem solving, I'm not talking about the everyday call for service or an incident or a traffic collision or something like that. I'm really talking about those long-term chronic issues that are facing, that are causing harm in our community, that the police department is primarily responsible for. And no matter how many times we go here, and no matter how many times policemen respond to it, or how many resources we throw at this, the police department alone can't resolve this issue, can't find a long-term solution to it. That's what I mean when I talk about problem solving, is working to identify those things that we cannot solve alone, no matter how many resources we throw at it. So the second component of this is really partnerships. It's collaboration, it's community engagement, it's recognizing what those issues are throughout our community, and then really finding partners that can address the root causes. There are, in many ways, the police department has become a safety net for our community in so many societal issues, and that there is nobody else to call at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning or in the afternoon, so call the police department. And we are limited in what we're able to do when it comes to long-term solutions. And so we want to be very diligent and have worked to be very active, and you'll hear about some of that, of the partnerships that we've worked to develop to really try to make good and effective and efficient use of our resources, recognizing that there are many issues that we deal with on a daily basis that at its core we cannot impact, and we need collaboration and partnerships. The third part of organizational transformation is really talking about putting and structuring the organization in such a way that those two things can happen, both internally and externally. Encourage our people to be innovative and looking where our services don't meet expectations or where there are efficiencies that can be gained if we entertain something new. We want them to be innovative and creative. And so the combination of all of these elements is really how we've defined our community policing philosophy. And you'll hear some more about that as well. But before I get to the specific request for next year, I want to give you, and we will give you, an overview of the police department's activities over the last 3 years, some of them directly related to the measure, some of them not. I will provide an overview of crime and calls for service in 2021 as compared to 2020. Christy Tinter, our HR director, will come and talk about staffing and the efforts to recruit police officers over the last 3 years. And then the assistant chiefs will come up and highlight some areas of growth throughout the organization over the last several years, and also talk about next year's request. Part 1 crimes. Part 1 crimes are categorized offenses that we report to the federal government every year. Actually, we report these specific offenses to the FBI on a monthly basis, but we produce these reports at the end of every year. Part 1 crimes are categorized as violent and property crimes. As you can see, overall, the total Part 1 crimes, which will be the table to the far left, our community experienced an approximate 7% increase in total Part 1 crimes last year, or that were reported to us last year. The most troubling stat is that of homicide. In 2020, we had a record 45 homicides in our city, and in 2021, that was surpassed when we had 60. It was not unique to our community, this high level of violence, and it is an unfortunate trend that we have seen across our country over the last 2 years, and it is continuing today. You saw some data a little bit earlier. About 70% or more of our homicides over the last 2 years have involved firearms. But what's really important and troubling in a lot of different ways is that over 50% of the people that we have arrested for homicide in the last 2 years had prior acts of serious felonies. that absent some legislative or prison reforms, would likely have been in custody at the time that those homicides were committed. There was an approximate 30% increase in reported sexual assaults on the property crime side. We actually saw reductions in burglary by 16%, and this was the third consecutive year that we've seen the reported burglaries decrease in our community. There was an increase in theft and auto theft, and we have seen too often the number of reports, and you can see it in the news almost every night. We're looking for or arresting people for possession of stolen vehicles. Also, we've obviously have all seen the increase in catalytic converter thefts. That really just exploded last year. But I will tell you again, we are frequently arresting offenders over and over and over again for these same offenses. It wasn't that long ago that we arrested an individual for driving a stolen vehicle and drug possession, arrested him, booked him into the jail, and the very next day arrested him for driving another stolen vehicle. This is not an uncommon occurrence and occurs all too frequently. Here's some Part 1 crime data compared to some other cities. You can see over a 3-year period. Last year, represented in the yellow, is 2021, and all of those cities had reductions in total Part 1 crimes, with the exception of us. This is only the Part 1 violent crime. It is not total Part 1 crime. But when you adjust for population and look at a crime rate per thousand, you can see that we didn't fare as poorly, that our crime rate, only Oxnard had a lower crime rate per thousand in 2021 for Part 1 violent crimes. Here's some information on some calls for service. I'm going to talk about calls for service and response times here briefly. We had about 11% increase in calls to our communications center. Over 776,000 calls came into the police department last year. 911 calls increased by 10%, to almost 300,000 calls. And the actual number of dispatched incidents also increased to almost 250,000. Here's some data on some Priority 1 calls. Priority 1 calls are our highest priority. They involve some life-threatening type circumstances, and as you can see, they have continued to increase over the last 4 years. ShotSpotter. ShotSpotter is some gunshot detection technology that we've implemented in 2018 for the first time. The area in dark is the area where we initially utilized that technology. It was expanded in 2021, and that is the area in red. That represents a total of about 6 square miles in our city that is covered with this technology, and where our community has experienced the vast majority of gun and gang violence. Last year we had 1,130 ShotSpotter activations, which was about 75% more than the year before, but as I just said, we doubled the amount of coverage, so I'm not completely surprised by that. However, gunshot, the vast majority of them in our community go unreported. People have given up and they've quit calling. And this technology is critical to us to know where this type of violence is occurring so that we can get there quickly. We can make arrests and apprehend individuals and reduce the injuries in our city. Just this year, so far, 5 of our homicide arrests have been impacted by ShotSpotter technology in terms of pinpointing where the shot was fired or allowing us to get there very quickly and seize evidence and make arrests. But it is also a goal of this technology is not just to apprehend individuals, as important as that is, but it is also to reaffirm to our community, particularly the area of this community that is plagued by this gun violence on a daily basis, to reaffirm to them our commitment to their safety, that we do care about these violent crimes and will respond as quickly as we can. And this technology has helped us be able to share that message. Response times. Here are Priority 1 response times for 2021 as compared to 2020. All of the police zones, we have 6 of them, saw some increases in our Priority 1 response times. There are some numbers that represent the percentages of increase. The hill and the valley zones saw the lowest increase, and the central zone saw the highest increase at 10. But when you also factor in the call volume, each of these police zones also experienced a similar call volume increase, with the exception of the south zone that had a decrease in the number of calls. Just for orientation, the north, south, and north central and south police zones are areas west of 99. The Hill, Metro, and Valley are east of 99, just for some orientation there. Police staffing and police officers are obviously a critical part of our success in being able to reduce our response times and effectiveness in our policing strategies. And so I'll invite Christy Tinter to come up and talk about the efforts over police recruitment over the last several years.
Sound check. Good afternoon, Committee Chair, members of the committee. As the Chief said, I'll be walking you through today our goals, accomplishments, and overall strategy in the pursuit of increasing our total sworn complement. So to best define the goal and just bring us all on the same page, the goal was attributed to Council Goal number 1, quality public safety services, and specifically under PSVS, we had a goal to hire 100 officers over a 3-year period. Now, to set the stage and the clock, that started July of 2019, and at that time, we had 389 sworn personnel. Now, this is an exciting goal. Not many of my colleagues have the opportunity to hire in this capacity. As you saw over the last several years, many agencies were going through defunding efforts, layoffs, transitions with their sworn complements. So being able to say, no, we're hiring 100 and our community is desirous to have you here was really exciting. And to be entrusted with that from the community wanting this initiative to move forward, we did not lose sight of the magnitude of that. However, we had to pause and say, how do we do this? This is different than what we've done. Historically, we did an academy maybe every other year. Sometimes we hired 6 officers in a year. So saying, do we have the right infrastructure? How do we regroup? And like any journey, you have to have that map to say, where do I go? And for those of us who travel, we know that you get on the road and you start moving, and some days it's bliss. Traffic moves well, good pace, you're making progress. But you can have detours and stops and rerouting. And so that's what we really needed to assess as an internal team. Do we have infrastructure here? This is an amazing accomplishment to pursue, but do we have the right infrastructure to move it forward effectively and pursue the goal? Because if you just add 100, there's 100 if you want to count them. If you just add 100 into existing infrastructure, you can have a lot of delays and a lot of setbacks. And so that's what we needed to look at. What do we have in motion? And the most notable item that we had in motion at the time of this goal was the California training facility. I will stand today and say, without the opportunity to open the training facility, we would not be where we're at today. That allowed us to have volume and number of sessions increase to even attempt this goal. There are many regulatory items that go unforeseen in the hiring process through the post standards, which we'll touch upon in a moment. But if you're not certified to have a training component, you're at the mercy of other agencies. So we have to ask Kern County, do you have a space to put an academy trainee? Or we have to send them out of town, or we have to try to pull someone from another. So being able to say we can run our own academy and maximize the headcount to up to 50 was a huge accomplishment. Now, in addition to what we had in motion, we were looking at our job descriptions. How do we advertise? We were looking at how do we reach the public. There was already a great many efforts in play that led us to this. How do we simplify the process? Does it have to be that complicated, but still we're in compliance and able to pass audits because we're audited on the hiring of police officers. So there's many ramifications for doing it incorrectly and not having that infrastructure. Ultimately, we knew we needed better communication, we needed better collaboration between human resources, who's the owner of the hiring process, and the police department, who's going to be taking those trainees. And we formed an applicant engagement team. We meet bi-weekly, a small group of command staff and HR staff who come together and say, what are our initiatives? How do we maximize? Where do we go? What's the right and the left hand doing? And we move forward. So let's talk about what our group has been doing. But before that, for the group, I just want to remind the hiring process. Right now, the academy setting is the largest opportunity we have to increase the influx of our sworn complement. The trainees, again, we can do sessions 2 to 3 times a year. We can have groups of 50. We have 2 options, a lateral or a trainee. The trainee process has the largest output, and so that's where a lot of our efforts are focused. But like anything, it takes time. And so an average recruitment process is almost 6 months. So starting with 8, 9, even 1,000 applicants, and getting that to those that pass each step that are required by regulatory guidance under the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission, POST, which is a state agency in California, we have to satisfy their requirements for background checks, psychological exams, medical screening, before we can bring someone on. And by the time we go through this entire process, it's roughly a 6-month process. And we've worked on reducing that. We've tried innovative ways to maximize and move people through, but worst case, and sometimes best case, is 6 months to get that process started. We also have to work with training staff to make sure that they're eligible with hours to move it through. So what have we been doing with those individuals once we have them? Well, initiatives need to focus on attraction and retention. While we focus on hiring 100 officers, if we have a revolving door with staff leaving, that doesn't help us. So we've had to focus on both ends of the spectrum. And to be honest, a campaign for recruitment of sworn officers feels like the new release of a Nike tennis shoe. And I have teenagers and there's apps and drawings and I don't know all about that, but it's very competitive at this time. At any one point, there's over 300 agencies on governmentjobs.com recruiting for the exact same position as we are. If we're not present, if we're not vocal, if we're not responsive, we're not in the game. And so we've had to take initiatives to be present. And so what does that look like? Well, first, we've partnered with Cornerstone Communications. They facilitate Behind the Badge. Behind the Badge is a publication that highlights and tells the story of policing agencies. It gives the personal view of what are the assignments, what is the work. They have a social media presence of over about 123,000 just on Facebook alone, plus they're on every other social media outlet. But they've been great at telling our story and showing the positive work that our community through the BPD is doing right now. And that's great for advertising and giving a personal view of our work. We've looked at the job specs. We've had retention bonuses. We've looked at hiring incentives. Again, watching trends and being conservative. We've seen hiring bonuses of up to $50,000 nationally. We're at $4,500. Again, that's to help with the purchase of equipment and supplies. So it's been vetted in terms of the soundness of it. But again, that's what we're competing with. There's other agencies that are offering that much for new hires. We've also done more expanded outreach. So again, part of our initiative, not just hiring 100, but the representatives of our community. So doing more work with other diversity outlets in terms of the national NALA, which is the National Law Enforcement for Women in Executive Leadership in Law Enforcement, Hispanic Commission on Law Enforcement, POST, PORAC, having our job out there at all times continuously. You'll see in the bottom, there are recruitment cards. Every patrol officer should have a recruitment card. It has our QR code. If you meet someone at the grocery store who is a great individual and maybe could be a BPD officer, get them connected with a mentor, with a ride-along. We need to advertise at all times. And that's why we have a referral bonus because we believe our employees can be our best advocates for the work that we do. So again, some of the initiatives that we've been working through and having much more focal presence on social media. Advertising, again, advertising campaigns are like a Super Bowl commercial. We have to be out there and in front of the public. Our applicants have told us, I have 2 or 3 applications pending. Our number 1 graduate from 2 academies ago said, I've got an application at the city of Burbank. If you get me the offer letter first, I'm coming to you. I love Bakersfield, want to live here. But if not, see, I'm going to Burbank. We have to be present, as I've already mentioned, and I cannot stress enough. We have banners all over town. We went with a bus campaign where we're mobile. We took a current vehicle that we have in use and put recruitment material on it in a wrap so we can take it to where it's more present at shows. And again, technology. I can scan the QR code and go right to our new and brightest addition over the last 3 years, our dedicated website. Cities of our size and scope have a dedicated sworn recruitment page. JoinBPD.us provides the presence in our virtual recruitment world that we require as the 9th largest city. This is a great addition. If you haven't looked at it, ease of application, applicant resources. My staff often jokes because my saying is, I want to be the concierge of the police trainee world. I want it to be easy, resourceful, and I want you to want to stay for a long time and come back. So these are the tools that have helped get us there. Now, what does all that mean? How is that translated into actual numbers and activity? Well, first of all, since that July of 2019, we have completed 5 BPD academies. We have a current academy that just started March 28th with 35 new hires. I would be remiss to not give a enthusiastic prop to the fact that we have 13 females in this academy. This is the largest academy female ratio that we have had, and so we hope that our efforts are paying off, but that's something that we're very pleased to share. In addition to that, our police academy graduate laterals, we have hired 11. That is the largest amount of laterals since I've been at the city. We usually have 1 or 2 a year. We've hired 11 in the last 3 years. We have 1 pending and 2 starting in background. So the final number since July 2019, we have hired 218 individuals that started, came and onboarded, and worked a day or more. Now, what does that translate into current headcount? So as we said, when we started, we had 389, and today we have 469. The column of authorized shows the approved headcount from City Council. So at this time, we have 507 approved positions. We have 469 filled positions. We have 3 in the queue right now, and we will have another academy in the fall, September, where again, we're hoping to put up to 50 into there. What that overall means is a net 83. Now, I understand goals. Goals are, did you meet them or not? We had a goal to reach 100. We have not. So by June 30th, the close of this fiscal year, I do not see that number drastically changing and becoming 100 with what our current influx is. But again, we will keep pursuing that number. So again, 218 total incumbents hired for the potential of sworn, and we have a net 83. Let's take a minute and look at some considerations of how the landscape changed since 2019. Not at all meant to be a list of excuses, but to say these were items, again, that detoured on that journey and that maybe had impact to not reaching the 100 or influenced a departure from that 218 number to where we all are today. Some of you may be familiar with the term the Great Resignation. If you're not, you've probably felt it in your own workplace or you've seen it on the news. A very broad definition is 33 million individuals left the workforce in 2021. Now, reasons and theories why vary and will continue to be studied, but the biggest reflection for me is that government has taken a significant hit. And so government agencies, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, are reporting more government vacancies, the highest number of government vacancies in the last 20 years. Retirements from 2019 to 2020 increased 45% in the government sector. So what does that mean? It means potentially a reduced applicant pool. It also means people are exploring other opportunities for higher compensation, new career paths, work-life balance. So how does that translate to BPD? Well, we had an academy individual who was doing a great job in the training program walk in one day and say, I'm going to quit. Okay, why? I'm going to go be an engineer. That was not an interview question that we screened for, by the way. I did not anticipate that. But we have seen that. We've seen a questioning. We saw when the deputy sheriff in Wasco was killed in 2021, an individual walked in who, again, was doing a great job in the training program and said, I have to quit. That deputy's death really impacted my family, and I cannot talk my way out of this. I'm sorry, I have to quit. So we see that environmental factors have a direct impact in our efforts to hire more personnel. COVID-19 could be a presentation and a study in itself, but for us, we saw a reduction in applicants. We had about a third of the applicants reporting, many calling in saying they were in quarantine, ill, etc. So again, when we're trying to maximize our efforts and see a reduction, very difficult. National protests. The death of George Floyd in 2020 had an impact. Many reported a staffing crisis in PDs, with some agencies such as Seattle reporting a 39% exodus. Forbes called it the great policing exodus of our time. Now, again, we were positive. We were saying our community wants that, but again, very difficult for individuals to say, what is the stability of this career? Maybe not even associated with Bakersfield. So how did that impact our applicant pool at that time? Qualified immunity. In 2020, the state of California made revisions to the legal language on qualified immunity. I will not give that. I will retain that for our attorneys to provide, but ultimately more personal accountability in California for officers on civil rights matters. Not maybe a bad thing, not here to have any judgment on that, but for someone in law enforcement for a long time, there's opinions, there's comments, there's concern on how will I be supported for what I see doing my job down the road. Department of Justice, in 2021, Bakersfield Police Department entered into a stipulated agreement with the Department of Justice. What that means is there will be an on-site monitoring. There's a lengthy plan of areas that we will have focus, including recruitment and different use of force policies, et cetera. And that's concerning to someone who's been, in some ways, we've received concerning feedback from those who have been in law enforcement a long time. Not all agencies have that requirement. So again, is that a consideration for individuals in the field? Presumptive changes. PTSD was added as a presumptive. A presumptive means that it's a more common occurrence. And we've seen an increase in industrial disability retirements related to PTSD, potentially as a result. Again, we need to attract and retain. The last two, geographic and local economy. 2022 reported a first-time drop, 12% of the population in California moving out of state, not Kern County, thankfully. But one of the things we've really held our hat on is that we have a great economy here with a reasonable price of living. Don't be in the commute of LA. Come here, have a nice home. Some economists locally have said the housing market's up 27%. So again, if we're not that ideal location and we can't sell you on a perk, it's a little bit difficult of a conversation to bring in new talent. And lastly, compensation and benefits. We traditionally have been on the lower end of the compensation realm. We'll be looking at that. Benefits to bring in laterals. We are a different system than LAPD. It would be great to hire and receive those laterals, but our Measure D in 2009 provided a different tier of benefits, which we received feedback that that's a preclusion from laterals coming to some of our openings. Again, information sharing, not a total one-size-fits-all, not an excuse, but we've received direct feedback from our applicants and our staff that these are concerns that we need to monitor, and we have seen some impact in our staffing ratios. In close, we're going to continue. We're going to continue with our initiatives, early engagement efforts, mentorship, physical fitness preparedness to see that those are ready to really start our academy, sponsored trainees, from other academies. Can we pull in from other academies? More job fairs, more visibility. We'll look at a compensation study in the future, and ESOF will be something that's part of the HR Public Cert PSVS request in terms of trying to automate and create a more efficient background check process for Swarm PD. Ultimately, though, each of us have a role in our community in promoting, and so we encourage all of us to promote and refer, join ppd.us or our recruitment cards to get our youth and our eligible members of our community interested in law enforcement. And with that, I will close and hand it back over to the chief. Thank you. Got it.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you very much for your work and your leadership over the last couple of years, and in particular, but also a lot of appreciation to the HR staff, because we would not be where we are today without their support. For the sake of time, I'm going to go through here pretty quickly. Assistant Chief Stratton is going to come up in just a minute and talk about kind of what improvements we've made over the police department over the last couple of years. In particular, again, related specifically to some items related to Measure N, but also just evidence and support of the strategy that we're working to implement and ensure that we are making as efficient as possible the use of the resources that have been provided to us. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the changes to the police department and to the professions over the last 3 years that were certainly not in place when the PSVS was enacted. Some of this has impact. Some of this is unique to our police department, and then some of it is not. But we've all had an impact in our operational areas in one way or another. COVID-19, obviously a worldwide pandemic. We had to pull sworn resources from different areas of the department, put together a COVID infection team that could develop strong protocols so we could prevent the spread of the infection inside the organization, so that we could maintain the staffing levels and the ability to respond to our community's emergencies. We closed our lobbies for almost a year and went into emergency staffing protocols and modified some of our responses to calls for service. As Christy said, in last August, we entered into an agreement with the Department of Justice to resolve their multi-year investigation into the police department. The agreement actually accelerates many of the improvements that we had planned on implementing across the police department. Specifically, we are going to be doing much more related to accountability, supervisory oversight, uses of force, and this is going to require some additional personnel over the years to reach full and effective compliance. The police department has a new chief and two new assistant chiefs and virtually a new command staff since over the last 3 years. And in fact, 40% of the Bakersfield police officers have less than 5 years. We are a young organization, and we are working very hard to bring people on board as quickly as possible, so that's not going to change for a bit. Body-worn cameras, you can see on the left side there's a body-worn camera. We are very grateful for this equipment and this technology that has helped us increase our professionalism, but also strengthen community trust. RIPA, there at the below, is the Racial Identity and Profiling Act. It is legislation that was passed that mandates that an officer document the demographics of every person that is detained. I mention those two together because between the body-worn camera and the RIPA legislation, the administrative duties for an officer at every single call for service is about 7 minutes. It adds 7 to 10 minutes of these administrative duties to tag the call that you're on in the body-worn camera system and also to make the RIPA entry that's mandated by law. We are getting ready to test some software and are very optimistic and hopeful that we can reduce that with this new software to about 2 minutes. The length has nothing to do with the officers and what they're doing. It has to do with the system that we are using to capture the RIPA data in particular. There's been legislative changes over the last several years. One of them in particular, two actually, that directly impact this is the public records request and some increased training for the officers. We have seen a significant increase in the request for police records. Legislation has changed that has provided more access to police records than previously before, and we are seeing tens of thousands of requests. We had to create a new unit within the records section of the police department to specifically deal with the volume of public records requests that we are receiving. Again, some legislative changes are going to mandate increased training for officers in a variety of different areas. And then because of where we are and what we're trying to do over the last several years, the impact of outside forces on the policing profession, the expectations of our community, we are working to become a learning organization. And this really requires us to invest in our data capabilities more than we ever have before, to really learn and understand what is happening within the organization and within our community. And we are working hard to ensure that the decisions that we are making are informed and are in fact the best decisions that we can make. So I will ask Assistant Chief Stratton to come and again provide a brief overview of sort of the improvements that we've made over the last several years, and then Assistant Chief Hale will come and make the specific request for next year, and then we'll be open for questions.
Good afternoon, committee. I'd like to take a couple minutes to tell you a little bit about some of the growth that we've been able to see operationally within the police department due to the measure. I'd like to start with our field services division, specifically in patrol, which is some of the most visible forms of where we've seen the growth within the police department. We've been able to increase the number of police officers assigned to each shift, being able to keep pace with the growth that Chief Terry talked about a little bit earlier. Chief threw out a statistic that 40% of our workforce has less than 5 years on, and out of that, almost 100% of them are assigned to patrol. So because of that, we've needed to improve and increase the number of sergeants and senior police officers, line-level supervision to ensure proper accountability, that things are being done consistent with how we would like for them to be done and consistent with what the public could expect as well. So that's, the measure's been able to allow for that. Also in our field services division is the traffic component. It has allowed us to restore and increase the number of motorcycle officers that are on the streets. We believe that high visibility patrol makes the roadways safer, but also decreases the opportunity for crime. It's allowed us to increase our speeding enforcement, as well as our street racing enforcement, as well as other public venue and special events that are occurring. It's also allowed us to grow within our Special Operations Division. It's increased our capacity within our specialized units, specifically our SWAT team, our bomb squad, crisis negotiators, drone teams, to being able to, these are teams that are utilized that are low frequency but high risk events and that require specialized equipment and training, and then we want them to be able to perform admirably in crisis related events. It's allowed for that. Within our Special Enforcement Unit, which is our gang unit, it's allowed us to restore and increase the number of officers that are in our gang unit, specifically responding to gang crimes and assaults that the city manager and the chief were talking about as well. It's allowed us to utilize the data from CalVIP to be more focused and directed with our enforcement and who we are looking at being able to target and impact to see a corresponding decrease in crime. We've been able to dedicate the officers and the resources to the California Violence Intervention Prevention Program that the city manager spoke about, and being able to use the data-driven strategies for a more effective police response. We've been able to restore and increase our impact unit, which is our officers that are specifically designed to investigate quality of life related crimes, but also being able to provide services towards the homeless. We've been able to create and increase a wellness coordinator. Specifically, year after year, we spend on average, going back historically 10 years, approximately $2.3 million a year goes towards risk management claims. The top 5 claims every year: knee, shoulder, back, heart, stress. That's what our officers see year after year. That's what the data tells us. So looking at a wellness coordinator that can work on impacting and preventing these things from occurring, keeping our workforce healthy and here and within our organization. Administratively, we've seen some growth within our quality assurance unit. The unit's mission is to create and monitor systems that are continuously evaluating performance within the department. We want to do this at the individual, at the unit, and at the organizational level. And this is also where the work of working to manage the compliance with the Department of Justice has come out of. So we've seen growth in that assignment. The chief's adjutant is a position that was created. It reports directly to the police chief, and the full-time focus is on community engagement, as well as the development of partnerships and long-term solutions to the chronic problems that Chief Terry spoke about. We have transitioned our internal affairs investigators from detectives to sergeants. We believe that enhances the credibility within the community whenever complaints do come forward, having a supervisor being able to investigate this as opposed to a detective, but we've also been able to increase our capacity within our internal affairs detail as well. Within our investigations division, the measure has allowed us to restore and increase the number of detectives investigating homicides within our special victims unit, which deals with family violence and sexual assault. We've been able to increase the number of detectives that are investigating property crimes, as well as the creation of a cold case unit. Detectives that are specifically going back and looking at older crimes, being able to identify ones where new and modern technology might be able to be best utilized and leveraged to be able to bring closure to victims. Within our support services division, we've been able to see an increase in a restoration where going in years past, approximately 12% of calls for service that were coming in within the communication center were answered by a police officer working in overtime capacities within the communication center. The creation of a communications call taker position allows that to be handled by our professional staff, allowing a police officer to do other duties. The police report specialist position is a position that allows for reports to be taken telephonically. The creation of this specifically takes police service technicians and put them back into the field. It allows for a restoration of an in-person response to burglaries, specifically the creation of our burglary response unit. Police equipment and property specialist is a professional staff position as well that allowed police officers to be able to go back into the field. We had police officers working in our technology development, working on body-worn camera redaction to comply, and this professional staff allows us to be able to have our police officers back into the field. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about services and partnerships. Now we've gotten away from staffing. This is a project that we're particularly excited about. It was a pilot project, a mental health call diversion pilot project that occurred. It began in August of 2021 with a partnership with Kern Behavioral Health, where we take a mental health professional that works in the communication center. You can see that this mental health professional handled 362 calls for service that came in. This is one of the most frequent, if not the most frequent, call for service that comes into the police department. You can see that this person was able to handle 63% of those calls themselves, diverting a Bakersfield police officer from responding to these types of calls for service. We believe this pilot project was wildly successful, and you'll hear my partner, Assistant Chief Hale, talk to you a little bit about that more for the next year. Excuse me. Some of the additional partnerships that we've been able to explore, you heard the city manager talking about the California Violence Intervention and Prevention Program, which we've been able to partner with and develop relationships that we believe are allowing us to focus our enforcement strategy, but also simultaneously being able to invest in prevention efforts for those who are most at risk of becoming victims or ongoing victims of gang violence. We've been able to increase our school resource officer program to we have a large partnership with the Bakersfield City School District, but our school resource officers respond to every school within the city to work on intervention and prevention. Some of the data from our violence intervention and prevention has shown us that the ages of offenders are getting younger. Therefore, we believe that the preventative efforts need to be younger as well. It's allowed us to maintain our staffing at the Bakersfield Police Activities League, having 2 officers that are assigned there, where every day between 80 and 100 kids are coming through their doors, working on a positive environment to prevent them from hopefully going down a bad road. We've also been able to increase our junior police academy. This year, we're going to anticipate having 200 kids coming within our doors, working in a structured environment with Bakersfield police officers as a part of our preventative efforts as well. We're exploring a diversion program as well for low-level offenses and just working on ways to keep kids out of the juvenile justice system. We've been able to have and form an internal task force with the Kern County District Attorney's Office, specifically focusing on human trafficking and the proactive investigation, and then partnering with the Alliance Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault for the corresponding care for our victims. As it relates to Transwest security, these services were originally retained to fill the gap in police officer staffing. We're seeing success as it relates to homelessness and quality of life issues. We meet with them directly based on council referrals, based on data that we're seeing, that based on feedback that's coming from citizens and business owners about areas where they would like to see a presence at the police department. It might be a lower level offense that we're not able to fill at this point. Utilizing Transwest has been an excellent help for us to be able to have high visibility patrol services, being able to prevent crimes from occurring. The measure has also allowed us to grow technologically. We see that Chief talked to you about body-worn cameras and the growth in the ShotSpotter program and the successes that we've seen there. We've also been able to pilot the ShotSpotter Connect program, and my partner, Assistant Chief Hale, will talk to you a little bit about the ask as it relates to that. But as technology has grown everywhere else in society, it's grown in law enforcement as well, and the need to be able to utilize and leverage those technologies to help us investigate and prevent crimes from occurring is needed now more than ever, and the measure has been huge in allowing that for us. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my partner, Assistant Chief Hale, to talk to you a little bit about some of the positions coming forward, and thank you for the opportunity.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is, again, Mike Hale, Assistant Chief. I'm going to be talking to you about a variety of positions, one being a sworn position and the rest being professional staff. I'm going to talk to you about some operating opportunities and equipment expenditures that we'd like to propose to you. So the first position is a sworn police captain. With the increase in police personnel in our field services division, which is our largest division, having the majority of all of our sworn personnel, along with professional staff, there is a need to increase that complement by another captain. And so that captain will be able to increase supervision, increase oversight, ensure compliance with policies, and enhance the ability to develop community policing strategies. Ultimately, City Council goal number 1, providing better quality public safety service. The next position is in our Public Information Office. It is a one communications coordinator. The communications coordinator will work directly for the chief and the current public information officer as a sergeant. Over the years, there's been a dramatic change in how and where people in our community, in our organization, across the nation get information. We can no longer rely on traditional methods of communication within our in the way we communicate with the community. So having this communications coordinator will enable us to implement a strategy that is original, it's transparent, it's interactive with the community. Hiring this person will be a professional in this field and have expertise in the field and be able to build better trust and stronger trust with our community members. It will also provide an opportunity to provide and improve public safety by way of educating the community on self-protection in ways that we have not been able to do that before, which ideally will reduce crime and reduce response times for police officers. The next position is in our Quality Assurance Unit. Oh, thank you, Christy. Sorry about that, committee. So our next position is our Quality Assurance Unit, which is one performance analyst. Our Quality Assurance Unit supports the department by providing data, audits, inspections, early interventions on our police personnel. It's responsible for evaluating and measuring organizational process with an ultimate goal of focusing on the whole organization's performance level. This performance analyst will provide quality oversight, accountability tools to make it easier for department staff to make decisions on performance assessments and fiscal strategic decisions with confidence and accountability. Next slide. In our investigations division, we'd like to add a crime analysis supervisor. There'll be one of these. This position supervises and will supervise 5 crime analysts within the police department crime analysis unit. The role of the supervisor that is currently supervising this unit is a sworn sergeant who is doing this as a collateral duty. This will enable that sergeant to be able to focus on his or her detectives that they're working with and allow this crime analysis supervisor to provide a permanent and dedicated position to provide consistency, expertise, better product for the department and for the community, and will also improve employee wellness within this unit because of that consistent supervision that we will establish. The next position deals with our property room. We would like to bring on 3 additional police property equipment specialists, or PPES. The property room, the Bakersfield Police Department property room is the sole repository for all of evidence and safekeeping that our employees are seizing. It's a critical element in having a successful police operation. Current staffing is insufficient to process and secure the increasing volume of evidence being brought into the property room, coupled with the fact that we haven't been able to dispose of property for the past 5 years, so we have an absorbent amount of property that needs to be disposed. So these additional personnel will help the property room maintain our industry standards of maintaining the property room. It will increase the hours and the days that public will be able to access the property room, and will reduce the amount of time that officers and or detectives spend at the property room retrieving evidence, whether it's for investigative purposes or for court purposes. And again, will enable staff to begin disposing all of the property that's eligible for destruction. Moving on to our support services division, and specifically the communications center. We're asking for 4 dispatchers. Additional 4 dispatchers will ensure stable staffing levels, will reduce overtime for current dispatchers and our supervisors. That is mandatory. It will reduce call wait times for our community, and will reduce the call volume per dispatcher. Over the last year, each dispatcher for the period of a year is receiving and handling over 18,000 calls, and those 4 dispatchers will help reduce that number. And that 18,000 is higher than almost all of our comparable cities. In our records unit, 1 clerk typist. So clerk typists perform routine clerical duties throughout the police department as police staffing has increased, so has the administrative duties and clerical duties of our clerk typists. This particular clerk typist will be assigned to our public records request unit and to help ensure timely, accurate, and professional release of records to our community. It'll also help absorb the significant increase of incoming and outgoing telephone calls from the community, from other agencies, and from within our own organization. It will decrease the time spent when officers have to call into records and have information uploaded into various systems such as missing persons or grand theft auto vehicles. The officer will have a quicker turnaround time and be able to get back out there on the street and provide services. So Assistant Chief Stratton talked a little bit about Kern Behavioral Health and Recovery Service Partnership. It's been a very successful program, and we'd like to grow that to 3 clinicians. Again, the pilot project was 1 clinician. We want to grow it by 2, so for a total of 3 clinicians. If we add these clinicians, as you heard, the number of calls that the clinician handled was 63% of those calls coming in, which prevents officers from having to make contact and be in contact with subjects who are having a non-violent, non-criminal behavioral health crisis that can be handled over the phone, and those folks can be directed to service without any police officer involvement. This will decrease response times to priority calls for service, and will decrease the amount of time our dispatchers are on the phone with these non-emergency calls related to behavioral health issues. A piece of technology, ShotSpotter Connect. ShotSpotter Connect is a patrol management software. It uses artificial intelligence to drive where we want officers to go and be for certain periods of time in our community where the system believes that a crime will most likely occur. If we use this technology, which we have been using, it will help direct our officers to the right place, the right time to patrol an area, again, where crime will occur. It's going to minimize bias and over-policing in particular areas of our community. Just a quick win on this particular technology. We recently had one of our sergeants patrolling in one of the ShotSpotter Connect mission areas, and you can see on the photo there's little boxes there, and it's go to that area, patrol for about 15 minutes or so, and there's a likelihood that crime will occur. While he was in patrolling that area, a shooting occurred. He witnessed the shooting, was able to apprehend the suspect. Other officers responded, able to provide additional aid to the victim and get emergency medical services there in a very timely manner. And we've had other wins with this system as well. Another piece of technology, SpiderTech. SpiderTech provides direct feedback from the community that is really timely to our department that's designed to improve communication and transparency with our community. The system is integrated into our automated dispatch system. It generates automated text and or emails to the people who are calling in and reporting crimes, whether they're a victim or just calling in reporting that a crime is occurring, and it does this in multiple languages. It also provides an automated survey that's generated at the end of the conclusion of the call for service to the community, so we can get that direct feedback, which we believe builds community trust and increases and betters our service. This technology will improve response times by decreasing the frequency of callbacks that occupy dispatch lines and resources. It provides information to these crime victims and reporting parties about why your call has been delayed, case number, who the assigned detective is, who the contact information within the department you need to speak to. It also provides an arrest notification to the victim, so they have that full circle service, if you will. And again, it increases community engagement to measure community interaction independently. So moving on to equipment proposals. We would like 15 black and white patrol vehicles. These will help maintain a vehicle availability for our patrol officers to ensure rapid response and efficient deployment. 2 off-road utility vehicles. These will enhance our off-road capabilities for primarily our impact unit, who's working with the homeless community and in these encampments in hard-to-reach areas within the city of Bakersfield. Vehicles will also be used for a variety of large-scale community events for security purposes, for that quick reaction response to emergencies. police service technician trucks. We're proposing that we get 4 of these, and these are necessary to accommodate the increased complement of our police service technicians and our parking enforcement technicians. And lastly, as far as equipment, is 2 smart trailers. Smart trailer is a speed monitoring awareness trailer. They are used for public safety and public awareness. We will be deploying these based on complaint driven from the community and or data driven based on areas where motorists are speeding and or there's a high frequency of collisions that are occurring. It's going to supplement our current traffic deployment and enforcement within the community with an ultimate goal of reducing speed and collision frequency. And then in summary, the budget summary, the numbers. So for all of the ones sworn and the professional staff positions, it's $1.2 million. For operating equipment and personnel is $3.2 million. And thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, please.
Don't go far. All right. I appreciate your indulgence. We tried to cover a lot of material and really give you an overview of the progress and the improvements that we've tried to make. Like I said, we take very seriously our responsibilities and have worked to try to ensure that we are implementing the resources and using them the way that they've been designed and the way that our community needs and expects. And so, again, we wanted to give you an overview of how we've done that over the last several years and some of the philosophies and different things that we're doing, as well as the requests that we have for next year. And so I appreciate your time and patience, and we're available for questions.
I will turn to my colleagues. Any questions, comments, requests to speak? Vice Chair Abernathy. Oh.
I want to thank you for your presentation. There's a lot of information here, and you guys are doing a great job with the resources that you have. But one of my concerns is, as a constituent here, is obviously response time, right? Mm-hmm. And I know when you call into the command center and hey, I got somebody that's stealing my catalytic converter, or there's some kind of vandalism in the park, you're put in a priority queue. How many different priority queues are there?
9.
So, you guys are status driven, so I'm sure that you can probably find this information. How many calls are put out in those different priority queues? Like, how many calls come in for a low level priority 9? How many come from a 1? You don't have to give me an answer right now, but I'm just trying to get an idea of the volume of calls that come in for these different priority levels. And because one of the frustrating things in the community, I think, is the fact that it's a low level. You call the command center, and the dispatcher's pleading, I understand, but we're just overwhelmed tonight. We can't get to you, and then it's frustrating for the community.
Yeah, and I very much appreciate the question, and I can respond a little bit here because I do have some information. I could walk across the street and take you to the watch commander's desk, and I could show you the computer, and probably right now, what time are we at? 1:30 in the afternoon on a Thursday. There's probably 70 calls holding that are priority 1, priority 2 calls holding right now. And then it goes down from there. So that, and it's not unusual to have over 100 calls holding of priority 1, priority 2. Not so much the priority 1s. The priority 1s, about 80% of the time, we will get to a priority 1 call in under 10 minutes. Obviously, that's unacceptable because at that level of an emergency, what's most important to the community members is that they've called us, and we need to get there quickly. So we recognize that, and so but the volume is there. Like I said, there's 750,000 phone calls into it, and so I don't know if that helps give you some perspective or answers your question a little bit. Why we've got the telephone reporting unit, why we've got online reporting, why we've diversified and tried to be creative with other staff to reduce the incoming workload, to also be able to focus police officers doing exactly what that is, out in the field responding to calls as quickly as done. It's been very difficult and challenging over the last couple of years, but that's our focus and what we're working toward by making sure that we're being efficient with everything as well.
Yeah, you guys have a tough job, no doubt about it, but I'm just trying to wrap in my simple brain how an electronic signboard and an ATV vehicle is going to reduce that call, make that so people, when they call in, get a response, right?
Yeah, so I would tell you it's the cumulative effect of a variety of those things that take the focus of an officer, that takes, because Spider Tech is there and it's automatically pushing notifications out to the community members about what your case number is, prior to that, right now, all of those calls are coming into the comm center. A dispatcher is having to answer that when a 911 call is coming in. Mm-hmm. So the cumulative effect of the clinician in the comm center, reducing the calls for service that a police officer has to respond to, getting other professional staff positions in the police department that support police officers being able to go back into the field, having a detective sergeant that doesn't have as a collateral duty to focus on the crime analysis unit, that he can focus on case assignments and making sure that detectives have the support that they need to solve the crimes that have occurred. It's a cumulative effect of a variety of these kinds of things that we're working toward to make that officer available and reduce those response times. The vehicle, off-road vehicle, that really is about access into some of these remote riverbed areas. We've had vehicles get stuck. We are unable to, with our current vehicles, to transport enough officers in, transport prisoners out. This will simplify that again, all making more efficiencies and grabbing it where we can so that we can be there when the community needs us.
No doubt that there is a need, definitely a need. But on the other hand, when we get to the human resources into things, what's the attrition rate for the Bakersfield Police Department year after year? How many officers do we lose in a year for retirement or whatever, or they leave and go to another jurisdiction? What's the attrition rate?
There's about 35% out of the academy, and that usually happens within the first month. There's probably between 17 and 25 separations outside of the department for retirements, resignations, terminations, other types of separations, going some other agency. In the last year or two, we've seen a lot of those move out of California.
So given communities a similar size, where do we need to be to have an adequate police force of sworn officers?
That's a very good question as well, and it's sort of an unknown. There's no perfect science. We had a facility study that was done this last year to assess the police department's facility needs over the next 5, 10, 20 years. Part of that was also a staffing study that was done to look at our workload, look at our distribution of personnel, deployment strategies. And they came back with an approximate number, and I don't remember off the top of my head, but we're probably, with the 100 that we're trying to hire, we're probably within 10 or 15 positions of what they assessed that we should be 2 years ago.
Okay, and just my final question. What's the overtime rate for the PD right now? How much overtime are our officers working above the normal 40 hours that they work?
A lot. We can't fill the overtime with
So if you
the
could
needs
equate
from the
that
community.
into positions, what would that equate to?
Yeah, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but it would be quite a few additional ones.
So it seems to me that we're spending an exorbitant amount of dollars in overtime, and we're losing officers from attrition because maybe they're burnt out.
There's no question that that's an impact, for sure.
No further questions.
Thank you, Committee Member Dewey. Vice Chair Abernathy.
Two things. One, I don't think there's a day goes by, I don't get 3 or 4 of these callbacks doing these questioning, how was your experience? And I never do it because it's just, I know what's going to happen to it, So if you think there's a dollar value to that and you're going to really change services, maybe do it. But otherwise, most of us gave up a long time ago on that. The other part was, I don't know if anybody here was on the previous 2 years worth of committees, but you're asking for these positions, and I don't know how many you asked for last year or the year before. So again, I'm looking at everything as 35 years worth of an employee here and having to pay for them and their retirement. So I was just wondering, this is all new, and then last year you asked for some.
Yeah, I think it was 23 or 25 positions last year, most of them officers or half and half, and this year's about 12. And the vast majority of them are obviously professional staff. And we're really looking to find career stable positions because for many years, the police department assignments, sworn officers would go into the property room, would go into many of these other areas of the department. We had officers sitting at some point in the telephone reporting unit taking phone call reports rather than engaging with the community or being up in investigations, assessing a case because of we didn't have the staffing. And so that's part of why we've turned our focus this year, is to identify some of these support staff so that we can make the best use of the officers, because we've had them doing a variety of duties over the year. But every year, obviously, our number of requests have gone down, and this year it is 12.
On your vehicle purchases, I know in other places in the city, they prefer to purchase through local vendors, local dealers for PD vehicles because they're so specialized. Do you purchase them factory direct, or do you go through local dealers?
I'll have to turn and respond to the experts in the audience here. Come on, Mike.
Stumped
Good
you,
thing
Chief.
we have Public Works here, because that's who handles that. I appreciate the question, though.
Yep.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mike Vogel, Fleet Superintendent. Typically, we try and purchase vehicles locally, and actually the police vehicles, they are purchased from the local Ford dealer.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
And then just getting to this issue of efficiencies, the communications coordinator position I saw would be reporting to a PIO. Is that PIO position still a sworn position?
It is.
Okay. Any thoughts about making that one more of a professional position? I know it's a sworn, semi-rotating position.
It is, and we have considered it, but there is, I've not yet found a good replacement for a sworn officer standing there being able to truly relay context and really important public safety information. But a lot of agencies do it, and it is something that I'm considering as well.
Okay. Any other questions from my colleagues? Committee Member Perez Andreessen.
Hi, a quick question on the budget summary, the line item, the mental health differential response item. Is that for the current behavioral health line item? Okay.
Yes.
And what does that cover? That's 3 positions, you said?
That's three clinicians, salary and benefits.
And this was the first year that they were used, right?
Yeah, they've only been, we did a pilot project beginning in August of last year, and they're still there. That one clinician is there. What we're asking is to, because of the success that we've seen in being able to have the time saving for officers, we're asking to make the project permanent and to fund it with 3 positions. It won't quite get us 24 hours a day, but we'll be able to cover the high demand or the highest volume days.
And will this be the provider that you use going forward if it's going to become a permanent?
I don't know. I mean, this is sort of a new thing in the law enforcement, and so our partnership, we have a great partnership with Kern Behavioral Health because we have other co-response teams, other mental health crisis response teams. So the integration of that fits very well now because they have access to all of the same resources, and there's continuity of information within behavioral health that this clinician, the comm center, is able to access immediately. In the future, might there be some other alternatives? Perhaps so, but right now that's what our plan is, to move forward with them.
Okay, thank you.
Committee Member Coleman.
Thank you. Chief, thank you very much for your presentation there. I appreciate it. Before I ask my question, I kind of want to make a comment. It's easy for us to say, hey, we want to hire 100 new officers. We want to add another 100 new officers. But this gets back to the point I was trying to make when we were talking about adding 30 park rangers, is that when we talk about that, we seldom take into account the effect of that. What does it take to hire 30 people, and is all their equipment accounted for? Is all the support staff accounted for? Those kind of things. So when we say we want to add 100 officers, it adds another 25. I don't know, 25. I'm making up the number, but it adds a number of people to fill these other positions that those extra workers create. And so I think we just need to be conscious of that when we're talking about how we're adding people in general across the city. But in terms of what you're doing, Chief, personally, I like pushing off some of these things to non-sworn officers to do. But how are you utilizing sworn officers that are injured or otherwise on restricted duty, and how do you use those officers to fill in some of these other positions, and is that something that you can count on, or is it too nebulous to be able to identify?
Right now, we're using them in a variety of different ways. They do, at times, work in the comm center and get on the phone with a community member, because we have also discovered that sometimes an officer firsthand can help resolve an issue over the phone. So they'll work there. They'll work in our investigations division, triaging cases, making access to or assessing cases for detectives, making contact with victims. They'll work the front desk. They'll do a variety of those kinds of things depending on their modified duty and restrictions. But we utilize them as much as we possibly can within their restrictions, whatever that might be.
Thank you. And this chief that you're, not chief, this captain that you're talking about adding, is that somebody that you're anticipating promoting from within the organization, or is this somebody you're going to go outside your current organization to recruit?
It would be a promotion with a current employee.
So then we have to add two? In order to get our 100 gold, we have to add a captain and then one more officer?
No, because 100 is not necessarily 100 patrol officers, because that just doesn't work in a practical sense. And so these positions are created throughout the department. And so, yeah, I'm trying to catch up to your math in my head, but it's a little confusing.
Yeah. Well, because I think when we talk about 100 officers or 100 police officers, we're not, in our minds as the community, we're not thinking about the management staff that it takes to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about, I need to see 100 police officers
Right.
driving up and down my street. You know?
And an industry standard for span of control is about 8 officers to a supervisor. So if you had 100 officers, you would need a lot of supervisors on top of that.
Okay, my last question is about what you guys are doing in terms of diversity in the organization and diversity in leadership. I know that we're under some pressure to amend our charter to allow the city manager to look outside the department, recruit the chief. But what are we doing inside the organization to be sure that our management ranks are diverse?
That's a very good question, and we're working very hard to make sure that our department is representative of our community. With our promotions and command staff, we are promoting from within, and that is the entirety of our system right now. So our options to promote to command staff or management positions are based on current employees. We're doing a lot of, because I talked a little bit earlier about how young we are, 40% having less than 5 years. And so working with the city manager's office and human resources, they are providing some additional support to us to provide training, to understand what that is and understand the value of mentoring and ensuring that we're developing everyone to have opportunities throughout the organization, and also having an understanding of what the value of different experiences bring at different levels of the organization. Right now, the command staff is working to develop a succession plan that is employee-centered and department-centered. One, we want a plan that our employees can have and access and define their own path and know exactly what it would take qualification-wise to be at a certain position. But we also want it for the organization to identify what are the minimum mandated and different types of criteria for each position throughout the organization, so that we can be strategic about making selections and promotions to ensure that we are representative and have the diverse perspective.
No, thank you, Chief, and thank you, your staff, for a very good presentation. Thank you. I have no other question.
Thank you, Committee Member Coleman. Just a question, Chief. There's been a lot of discussion of the stipulated agreement with the Justice Department. Is there anything in this proposal that is necessary to meeting those stipulations? Like if something was not approved in this proposal, it would put us out of compliance with our pathway towards compliance with that agreement?
No, we've tried to approach this request with some dual purpose, so no.
Any other comments, questions? Committee Member Madland.
I had a comment. I love that you're promoting from within. I think it goes across your organization as far as people wanting to stay there and move through your program. But the police captain is $310,000.
I think that with total salaries and benefits, yes. I'll have to go back and look at the chart, but yes, that sounds right.
How much of a bump was that from his current position? I mean, probably don't know that, but that's...
I have two comments to just speak to that because a council member asked us that very question.
That's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. So salaries represent around $150,000 for that position. That is one of our realities around pension benefits and other benefits for our law enforcement. Our pension costs are about 50% of salary for our law enforcement partners, particularly those that are more senior who would be at that rank. And then there are other negotiated benefits, and so this is this is not at the middle step, or excuse me, this is not at the first step. This is more towards the middle step, and typically you'll see a 5 to 10% range between ranks. We have compaction right now, which means we don't have as much of a spread as we probably should have in our organization. But that just really reflects on the true cost of law enforcement in today's environment. We actually are below market in some areas of our law enforcement pay compared to other like organizations, and that is the cost of law enforcement today.
Well, you're needing more officers on the street. I mean, from 150 to 310, that's a pretty good raise.
No, I'm sorry. It's a 5 or 10% raise. The 150 is just the salary. What makes up the 300 are all the other benefits.
I don't know what to say to that, but the benefits are exorbitant. And there's your money for some of these issues that are needed.
Well, I think we'll receive that as feedback. My response on the money for other things is that the officers, a sworn patrol officer is the same, similar percentages of their costs go towards their pensions and benefits as well. That is, again, the cost of public safety.
Well, the benefits are insane. The price of them. I know there's a cost to doing business, but...
Again, appreciate your feedback. We take that as feedback. That is the negotiated benefits for all of our law enforcement, from low ranks to high ranks.
All right. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you, Chief, and thank you to the Assistant Chief and the Assistant Chiefs, and to our HR Director for your very thorough presentation.
Chair Ortiz, if I may, I'm conscious of time and that we've nearly spent our time. The fire department presentation is shorter than the police, and I do think we could still, in the next 10 minutes, round out our public safety topic and ask Chief Frando to move expeditiously through his slides. But as he covers those slides, there aren't really large requests on the fire side this year, but did want to give some update of just where we're at, so that as part of the purpose of these meetings is to both give an update of how we've been doing on funds allocated as well as new proposals. And then I'll have two quick items to wrap up the public safety portion. We can shift the homelessness topic to our next meeting.
Okay.
And then the other fiscal solvency is very brief and kind of miscellaneous. We can fit that into next meeting as well. So we can wrap up our public safety in probably 15 minutes.
I would just note that we probably would need to extend the time of the next meeting if we're going to cover all these items. Thank you. Chief Frando.
Committee Chair and members of the committee, thank you for having me. I will be brief, I promise you. I would be remiss, however, if I didn't acknowledge the people behind me. It's nice to be surrounded by some really great and competent people, and I truly am surrounded by that. I have Deputy Chief William Ballard, Deputy Chief James Cherry and Deputy Chief Kevin Albertson, and my business manager. She can run, but she can't hide. She's way back in the corner over there. So I'm definitely appreciative of the people I have surrounding me. As mentioned, I will be brief. I will talk a little bit about the fire department. We are about 220 members strong. Last year, we responded to about 50,000, just over 50,000 calls for service, anything from fires to EMS to hazardous conditions. We actually increase in call volume annually by about 3,000 to 3,500 calls per year. On a side note, we actually have almost doubled in call volume since 2010 when we responded to just over 26,000 calls. So extremely busy department and continuing to get busy every year. Although fire is in our name, fire is not actually the highest percentage of call types that we respond to. In fact, fires make up only about 8% of our call volume, whereas medical emergencies make up nearly 60%. As we try to compare ourselves, very similar to what the police chief did, compare ourselves to other like departments, the comparable departments, when you look at budgets, we actually typically hover right towards the bottom when it comes to budgets, and you can see us there in 8th place out of 10. And when you look at call volume, however, we are typically at the top of the scale, second last year only to Stockton Fire Department, who ran about 7,000 calls more than we did. One of the things we like to do is put things on averages. If we average the other 9 departments that we compare ourselves to, on average, they have about $59 million budget, whereas ours is just over $52 million. Total responses, we look at other departments on average at 31,000 versus 50,000 for the Bakersfield Fire Department. And then just kind of put things into perspective, when you divide the budget by responses, it costs other departments on average about $1,800 to do business per call, as opposed to just over $1,000 for your Bakersfield Fire Department. Just talk briefly about one of the enhancements, thankful to PSVS, one of the enhancements we made to our department was our rescue program. So the rescue is actually that smaller truck in the foreground there. It's actually a 2-member response unit. As I mentioned, most of our calls are actually medical related, so it is actually outfitted mainly for medical purposes. It does have personal protective equipment, a small cache of some firefighting equipment, but it is truly set up for medical emergencies. It does not have water, hose, or a pump, so truly dedicated towards medical. However, it does respond to fires on that initial attack. They actually work for the command and control component, actually standing outside, the eyes and ears on the outside, getting that overall perspective for the safety of the firefighters who are on the inside, basically conducting or orchestrating the response, assigning resources, giving objectives, and they also work as the 2-in, 2-out component of our safety for our members. So when we have 2 members going inside of an immediately dangerous to life and health environment, IDLH, we actually, by OSHA, have to have 2 members on the outside just in case something goes wrong. They can actually affect a rescue on our people. We also look at these rescues to improve our response times, and they definitely did do that, and I'll talk about some numbers here shortly. But we implemented these rescues in 2 of our busiest districts, Station 2 and Station 6. Station 6 is actually on Brundage Lane, just west of Union. So half of its calls, as you can imagine, go east of Union, and the other half go west. The other rescue is assigned to Station 2, which is on East 21st Street, and most of its responses actually occur in East Bakersfield. When you look at the busiest districts that we have, Station 6 actually responded to, or there were 5,800 calls in 6's district last year. But one of the compelling things to note is that 20% of the time that a unit gets dispatched out of Station 6, another call happens in that same district before that unit can complete assignment. Before these rescues were implemented, that meant that other neighboring fire engines had to come into this district, longer response times, longer travel distances to get to an emergency in this first in. In fact, in 2019, there were nearly 1,300 calls that other units had to come in and take over in this first in district to handle an emergency. As a result of these rescues, we've actually seen a reduction in other neighboring resources having to come in and handle an emergency. Engine 1, for instance, had a 38% reduction in having to travel to Station 6's first in to handle an emergency there. Engine 2, a reduction of 32% into 6's area, and Engine 5, a 27% decrease in responses into 6's district. So that meant those neighboring resources were able to stay in their first in and protect the people who they were designed to protect. Another important note is that these medical response units are appropriate for those emergencies. So one of the things that we designed our response strategy on was sending the appropriate resource to the appropriate emergency. So as I mentioned earlier, 60% of our calls are actually medical related. So the first unit out of the house on a medical emergency is that rescue, leaving that fire engine in quarters so that it can handle that next call, whether it be a fire or EMS emergency. So it's definitely been a benefit. One of the other things that it's doing by handling the bulk of the calls in that district, it actually allows our engine to get a little bit of rest. Our engines, the lifespan on our engines is typically 19 years. So if we think of our personal vehicles, I don't know anybody that keeps a personal vehicle for 19 years, but these are fire engines. They're ridden hard, lots of wear and tear on the road, but a lot of also engine hours pumping water on incidents or running to run the emergency lighting for an incident. So hours, mileage, and time is really a detriment to our engines, and I'll talk a little bit later about one of the things that we're going to request this budget year. But our engines, they last for 14 years frontline, and then another 5 years in reserve status. So we keep them for about 19 years in the fire department. So to talk about a few of the positions that we're requesting, there will be 3 positions that the fire department is requesting this year, 2 of which are fire dispatchers. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity, because this is a public forum, to mention this is National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. So if you know a dispatcher, thank them. I think it'd be a great way. So the fire dispatcher positions, we actually run a joint communication facility with Kern County Fire Department. Last year, we actually exceeded 500,000 calls for service in the dispatch center, which is a 238% increase since 2005, the last time the Joint Powers Agreement was signed. Since 2005, the county has actually added 6 dispatchers to handle the rising call volume, whereas the city has actually added 2 positions a couple of years ago. A recent evaluation that was done on the dispatch center by an independent consultant recommended that the city add 8 dispatchers. This year, we are actually only requesting 2. Kern County is actually going to be adding 4 call takers to the complement of workers up on the Hill. And one of the things I would like to do as fire chief is see how that call taker position helps us in handling either call answer times or dispatch times, and see if there's another model that we can follow and other positions that we can add in the future. But I also want to get with the Kern County Fire Chief and start implementing a strategy on when we should hire new dispatchers, have some kind of a target line, not just arbitrarily request positions. One of the things that's important to note too is that state funding and ISO are also tied to performance up on the Hill. ECC is currently not meeting the state benchmark for call answer times. Typically, the dispatch center follows NFPA 1221 when it comes to call answer times and a lot of their other standards for operating. However, the state actually implements some stronger standards on us and ties additional or supplemental funding to those benchmarks. And we're currently not meeting the call answering times, which is actually implemented by the state, or which is 95% of calls shall be answered within 15 seconds or less. We're actually not meeting that benchmark, and there's about $1 million of supplemental funding that's tied to that benchmark. So the state actually could not give us that money, and we would be having to make up the costs that we're not getting from the state. And then also, as we follow NFPA 1221, we're actually right at the cusp of that, answering 90% of our calls 15 seconds or less. To fall any shorter than that would actually jeopardize or have a negative impact on our ISO rating. The other position that we're actually asking for this year is a fire service technician. And what that person would do is be responsible for the repair, calibration, and testing of critical fire equipment. Currently, we contract out some of that work, but we also have other members within our department who actually perform that work. They have to go get certified to be able to calibrate or test or repair things as important to us, like self-contained breathing apparatus or the masks that we wear. This person would go out, get the training, and be responsible for doing this on a daily basis. As I mentioned, some of our members actually do that work on a daily basis, but oftentimes they do it on their days off, and their availability has become shorter. We may, as a result, have a lot of equipment that's waiting weeks, if not months, to get repaired. This person would also help out logistically on large-scale incidents. So one of the things that we deliver to a large-scale fire is a light and air van. Currently, it's not in the initial deployment of a structure fire, so it may, one of the things that we have to resort to is calling it an additional engine to come out of their first stand, go to Station 1, pick up the light and air van, and deliver it to an incident. This person can go out, deliver the light and air van, and work as a logistical person and fill air bottles, but deliver that piece of equipment to us. And ultimately, what this is going to do is allow people to stay in their first-in district. So as I mentioned, we won't call other resources to pick up and deliver equipment like foam or the light and air van. But this person can also go out to the fire stations and perform fit tests, for instance. So annually, we go out we have all of our equipment, all of our personnel come out of their first stand, drive to Station 1, do a fit test, which means they're out of their response areas for 30 minutes, an hour and a half to perform that. This person can actually go and travel to those stations with the equipment and test those people in their stations so they're not leaving their first-in district vulnerable while we're performing those tests. My apologies. This is actually a snapshot of our current budget and our proposed budget for the next fiscal year. As you can see, the line for public safety and vital services, we're actually looking at about a 10% increase if things stayed the way they are and we did not add additional members. And I'll show you the cost of those members here shortly. And we're looking at basically salary and benefit increases and internal costs like fleet and technology services costs too, which are making up that 10% increase. Just a couple of slides ago, I promise. This is actually a breakdown of the cost for the three people that we are asking for, the two positions, but 3 people. The dispatchers for the 2 will cost $170,000 a year. The maintenance person or fleet service technician will be $93,000 and change on salaries and benefits, some operating costs, and there are some startup costs. He'll need a vehicle to travel to the station, some equipment, radio, and computer equipment. And you can see the grand total there at the bottom is $335,000 for the first year. And as I mentioned earlier, our equipment is really hurting. We don't have a lot of reserves in our fleet that are available to us on a daily basis. In fact, one of the reports that we have our battalion chiefs give us every morning is tell us how many reserves we have available and where they are. More often than not these days, it appears that our battalion chiefs are reporting to the deputy chiefs and myself that there are no reserve engines available. So that means that if equipment breaks down, what we're doing is going to the corporation yard and trading it out with the best of the worst, if you will. So we're looking at what can we trade this in for and what can come out of the shop right now without all the repairs being made on it. Adding a fire engine to our fleet would actually allow us to bolster up our reserve apparatus numbers. It will allow us to increase staffing at times like the 4th of July when we add additional members to our daily roster so that we can we enforce fireworks, and there's a lot of fires that break out around the 4th of July, so we have additional staffing, and to have additional apparatus at our hands would actually allow us to do our jobs. And also would help with our training commitments, like the academy that we have going on right now. We're actually training about 26 or 27 new members, and we're actually taking rigs out of service right now to deliver them to the training facility for training purposes. Having additional reserve apparatus and some that are actually in a lot better shape than the ones we have now that are between 15 and 19 years old would actually go a long way. And the cost of that piece of equipment is unfortunately $950,000, but if you factor in that it's going to last us for 19 years, maybe that softens the blow just a little bit. With that, that is actually my last slide. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Questions from my colleagues? Vice Chair Abernathy.
Maybe I misunderstood, but you contract out to maintain these vehicles, your fire engines, whatever else you have, and the engine is inside the fire station a lot of the time, and then so are the employees. And I'm thinking, can't you license or train the employees that are there to do maintenance that's needed versus now hiring another person who's going to drive around and do it?
So we actually contract out some of the work that's done to our equipment, but I think if our human resources manager was here, I think working people out of scope to mandate that they get additional licenses and certification may be actually going outside of their scope of work and maybe a contractual issue. But the fact of the matter is our people are trained to do that, the ones that volunteer to be trained to a certain level. They come in on their off days to be able to perform that work for us. But their availability has become a lot lessened now these days than they have been in the past. The amount of members that are willing to do that work has been reduced. So it really is tying our hands to be able to perform the work we need to.
What about the contracting out? Do you have somebody outside of employees that could do this?
So it would require a lot of different contractors to do that type of work. So for a self-contained breathing apparatus, fit testing may take a certain level of training and certification. So we'd hire one contractor to perform the maintenance on the compressor that does the filling of the self-contained breathing apparatus. Air bottles would take a different contractor. So all the different levels of work that we would need to do, the various work that would need to be performed, would require several different contractors come in and do that work.
And if I may real quickly, Vice Chair, you've asked some really good questions, because I would say that respectfully, but those are the same questions we were asking of fire as they brought this forward to executives for consideration. And so I would add two additional thoughts that we teased out as we looked at this. We have probably, I would make an estimate of 30 or 40% of this work is being done by contract, but a lot of it is being done in-house today, but it's being done on overtime and on these other shifts. And so we do believe that there are efficiencies to be gained here. There's going to be savings by not having those contract workers. There's a sort of a scattering of contract work being done, and a savings from the overtime and efficiencies that will help offset the cost of this additional position. Because we did ask, could we just contract all the work out? But there are some specializations that have to be done by firefighters on some of this equipment that can't be contracted out. And so instead of continuing to have this approach that is less efficient, put it under one individual that has all of the specializations, and there will be some cost offsets in those contract and overtime costs that won't be incurred to do this anymore.
Committee Member Madland.
I have two questions, but when was your quote on your truck? When was that done?
That's actually based off of a more recent purchase for a replacement fire engine, and that's the cost of the engine itself and the equipment that goes on it. So fire hose, rescue equipment, things of that nature.
Like in the last 60 days?
That'd probably be within the last 6 months, right? March. Since March.
This March?
Yes.
So 30 days ago?
Correct.
Okay, that's good.
And if I may, one of the challenges that we have when we're replacing fire equipment is the lead time on ordering it. So if we were to order it today, it's almost 2 years before we see that fire engine. That's one of the challenges for our department right now.
And if I may also just add, one of our reasons to move forward is to lock pricing in now. If we wait till mid-year or next year, we feel like we'll see large increases.
Well, actually, I have equipment and vehicles ordered, and even with my contract, number one, it's 30 days. And number two, prices have gone up 8 to 19%. So that's something. If you need it, you better move on it. Because even under contract, they're just, we can't do it.
Great point. Any other comments? You do? Committee Member Coleman.
Thank you, Chairman. Chief, you keep referring to On the Hill. Who are you talking about? What's on the Hill? And where is the hill?
My apologies. Yeah. That is our dispatch center. It's kind of a long-term phrase that we use from way back. My apologies on that.
All right. I was surprised. I don't know. Maybe it's just like my lack of knowledge of thing. I was surprised to see that we have these different, and then maybe this is more for the city manager. I don't know. I was surprised to see that we have these different dispatch places. That the fire department has their dispatch place in cooperation with the county, and the city police department is over here with another. Have we explored having like some kind of combined command center, maybe that's joint with county and other agencies? Because when I call 911, I don't know that it's going one place or another. So I was surprised to see that it is, and I just wanted to know if there's any efficiencies that could be had.
Yeah, thank you, committee member. I would say it is very typical for police and fire to be separate in many jurisdictions. You'll find some jurisdictions have created, and it's a PSAP, and you'll have to help me. Primary
Public safety answering
I'll
point.
say public safety answering point. So there are some organizations that unify sheriff, police, and fire departments, but it is less the norm than to have at least all of the fire joint and all of the public safety joint. We have looked at opportunities to come together on different things. One example, which is related but not quite the same, is regional radios. So when you're going to go and put up radio antennas for all of the communications, there's economies of scale to go in together, city and the county on a program like that. And that's why the fire dispatch is like that. Fire dispatch is joint, city, county. We have discussed whether it would make sense if we were to create sort of a joint training facility or a joint emergency operations facility. Would we try and co-locate a new dispatch center that would have all of those things in one place? That conversation's out there, but that's a really big undertaking, and we haven't really come to a conclusion on, sort of what's the time frame for that and exactly what would be in or out. But those conversations are out there. But I would say it's the way that it's set up today is fairly typical. But if you look at some of the most efficient metro areas, they have looked at combining their services into one location.
If I may, also one of the challenges that we have as a Bakersfield Fire Department is there are 2 fire departments that actually operate at our dispatch center. It doesn't matter if you live in the city or the county. You may live in the city and get a white county fire engine, and you may live vice versa in the county and see red when you're calling for 911 services. It's a little bit different for living in the city. You get police, Bakersfield Police Department that responds, but it doesn't matter where you are, where you reside, if it's in county or city dirt, you actually may get a different fire engine for your response. A lot of that is actually handled up on the hill at our dispatch center, and it's a little tricky because of the Joint Powers Agreement. We actually have the closest fire engine respond, and a lot of that coordination happens at our dispatch center, and may present a lot more challenges if we broke from the Joint Communications Center, we meaning the Bakersfield Fire Department dispatchers, and we housed ourselves with BPD. It would create some challenges in dispatching the appropriate city or county resource to your incident.
Yeah, I think I was thinking of just combining all of them in one place, but Mr. Clegg he addressed that, so I'll move on from that. My last question is about this fire service technician person, because I was going along with it until you mentioned that some of this work needs to be done by a firefighter. So is this a person that's going to be a firefighter, or is this person going to be a maintenance technician?
This will be a maintenance technician.
And who is this maintenance technician going to report to?
So Jim Cherry actually handles our support staff, and he actually coordinates a lot of our facility maintenance with the workers from General Services. He would actually report to Chief Cherry.
So we're not going to be back here next year looking for a supervisor and support staff for this position.
You have my word.
All right. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more slide.
Okay.
City Clerk, if you could pull up the original presentation, slide 31.
Right.
As this is coming up, there were just a couple of items that weren't spoken to in the presentations for one-time funding for police and fire. There's a $2 million allocation. You probably noticed it's a big chunk of money, and it just says Public Safety Partnership, and it doesn't say a whole lot. This is at the request of City Council. We have been trying to work closely with the Sheriff's Department, Attorney, and Probation to identify some regional approaches to some of our quality of life crimes. These are repeat offenses to quality of life crimes that don't seem to get addressed through the typical law enforcement system today. That answer we don't have ready to share the specifics of with a committee or council in this budget cycle, but anticipate it being a large partnership with large investments from both city and county. And this is frankly a set aside to allow us to finish that partnership. So that's what I can share at this point. And again, we're working closely with our other partners. The council has requested us to move in that direction and have some funds available, that if we come together in joint efforts, that we have the funds to do that. And then the second item there, violence prevention community transformation programs. As we know, it's really important to have those 100 officers on the street. But one of the challenges that if we don't start getting ahead of some issues, we're going to keep chasing the same issues year after year after year. And in best practice scenarios, you also develop prevention programs that get at root causes. And while this is a large dollar amount by itself in comparison to the millions and millions of dollars of public safety that we've just been discussing, it's a very small fraction of those costs to put towards some prevention measures, and an ounce of prevention is worth many pounds of intervention, as the adage goes. And this would allow staff to go and do some. This would actually be through the same gun violence intervention program. That same staff would go and develop some recommendations for intervention programs. And what this has looked like in other cities, it's been mentoring programs, or it's been job readiness programs. And you take at-risk individuals and you provide these evidence-based programs that help to reduce the number of ongoing issues related to crime and public safety. Not a huge dollar amount. This would be a start for us to say, let's go and research those programs that we think are the most fitting to the challenges we have in our community, because it's a little bit different in every community. Do we need a mentoring program? Do we need job readiness? Do we need to provide behavioral health services to individuals who are facing some of these challenges? Do we need to focus on public health or literacy as some of these underlying vulnerability factors to young people becoming involved in lifestyles of crime or violence? This is to be a start to get ahead of that, and let that team come back with some recommendations to the City Council for how to deploy some programs related to prevention. Beyond that, these other items here have been referenced in the other presentations that have come forward today. And with that, that's our public safety items. Happy to answer questions.
Committee Member Madland.
I have a question in regards to the property room shelving. 1.75 is for 1,700 square feet of shelving?
Yes, now these are, just for some perspective, good question. I asked the same question as well, actually. It's very expensive shelving. So it's articulated shelving that moves on a track, and so it can actually, it's like an accordion that moves together so that you can have many more shelves. It's also very tall, so the property room, the shelving's probably, I'm guessing, 15 feet tall, and can span, the entire length of the property room. And so this would probably triple the amount of things we can hold in the property room because of how efficient the shelving is.
All right, thank you. How do I turn that on?
Okay. With that, sorry, I still have to move down our agenda. So being done with our presentations, do we need to receive and file?
That would be fine.
Okay.
Yes.
So we've received presentations. There is no action required except to receive and file the presentations. Do I have a motion from one of my colleagues?
Motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion by Committee Member Keller, seconded by Committee Member Dewey, to receive and file this presentation. Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Chair Ortiz?
Aye.
Vice Chair Abernathy?
Aye.
Committee Member Madland?
Aye.
Committee Member Dewey?
Aye.
Committee Member Perez Andreessen?
Aye.
Committee Member Keller?
Aye.
Committee Member Coleman?
Aye.
Committee Member Singh?
Aye.
Committee Member Prince is absent. Motion is approved with Committee Member Prince absent.
All right. Next item, please.
Commissioner comments.
Any further comments? Seeing none. Moving to this meeting is adjourned at 2:25 p.m. Thank you to staff and thank you to my colleagues for all of your attention.